Welcome back. We are in module 4, lecture 2, and we will be talking about the membrane processes for wastewater treatment. So, we know that the membranes can be used not only for the water treatment, but it can also be used for the wastewater treatment, and we will find out that how the membranes can be applied for the wastewater treatment in this lecture. So the concepts covered in this lecture includes the introduction to the membrane processes. We will talk about the membrane process terminologies. We will also talk about the membrane process classifications. So the membrane process is widely used in various stages of water as well as the wastewater treatment so that we can achieve the desired water quality as well as we can also meet the effluent standards by using the membrane process. So when we talk of the water, so you must have seen that at your homes you are having a RO system which also houses the membrane. So there the membrane is used so that we can remove the total dissolved solids which are present in the water, which are causing not only hardness but they may also cause certain diseases because of presence of the certain metals in it. So there we use the membrane process so that we can clean the water, we can treat the water to the required desired water quality. Okay. In the wastewater treatment, however, the membranes are used so that we can contain the sludge or we can also contain the MLSS or MLVSS which is going out of the reactor. So it enhances the quality of the effluent to a greater standard. So when we are having the wastewater treatment processes, so we can have the membrane bioreactors. In membrane bioreactors, we are providing the membrane so that it may contain the sludge that may otherwise go out with the effluent, or we may require a secondary settling tank so that we can settle the sludge before we take the effluent to the disposal point. So here it not only enhances the efficiency of the reactor, but it also reduces the footprint of the reactor. So that's why the wastewater treatment also uses the membrane processes so that the not only the footprint will reduce, but the cost of the reactor will also reduce substantially in that case. But the cost of membrane may also be a matter of concern. So the membrane filtration, it involves the separation, that is the removal of colloidal as well as the dissolved matter, and which is having a particle size range of around 0.0001 to 1 micrometers. So here the membrane filtration is used to remove the colloidal as well as the dissolved matters which are present in the water or wastewater. Similarly, the membrane serves as a selective barrier that will allow a certain constituents to pass through it, and whereas it will retain certain other constituents depending upon a number of factors, whether it can be size, it can be shape, it can be charges which are present on the constituents which we want to remove from the wastewater or water streams. So we can see here that membrane is used so that we can filter the unwanted materials. For example, we can see here that the feed is coming to the membrane, and this feed may contains a number of constituents, and let's say that these constituents which are bigger in size, so that we want to remove, so they do not pass through the membrane, and we see that the permeate or the treated water, it goes out of the membrane, so it may contains the constituents which are desirable, which we do not want to remove, whereas the constituents that we want to remove, so they are basically taken away by the water in a highly concentrated solution, that is also called the retentate, it is also called the concentrate. So that's how the membrane process occurs, and that's how we use the membrane for enhancing the quality of the water or the wastewater. So there are a number of terminologies that we generally used during the membrane processes. So first is the feed stream. The feed stream generally refers to the influent which enters the membrane module. So it is called the feed stream because the influent that is being subjected to the membrane for the treatment, so that is basically also known as the influent, and that is also called as the feed stream. So we will refer to the influent as the feed stream in our coming lectures. Similarly, the water that passes through the membrane, which is purified, during the filtration process. So this is also known as the permeate. So we can see that the water that is passing, that is clear, that is purified, that is passing through the membrane, so this will be referred to as permeate. Similarly, the concentrated solution or the suspension that remains after the filtration process, that is, you have seen in the previous diagram that the water which contains a very high concentration of the species which are removed by the membrane, so it is known as the concentrate, or it is also called as the reject. So these are the substances that are the rejected by the membrane. Similarly, there is another term that is called the flux. So the flux is the rate at which the liquid passes through the membrane per unit area. So it is the flow per unit area that is passing through the membrane, so that is known as the flux. So if we talk about the units of the flux, so this will be represented in liters per square meter per hour, and shortly it is called LMH, right? Similarly, in the PSI units, it may be termed as gallons per square feet per day. So it is also known as GFD in the short term. So the membrane process terminology also involves the fouling. That is, fouling means that is accumulation of particles, accumulation of the microorganism, or accumulation of organic substances which are present in the water or wastewater on the surface of the membrane. So this fouling reduces the performance and efficiency of the membrane, because what happens that these accumulations, it will clog the pore size, the pores through which the water is passing. So this may reduce the efficiency and the performance, and this will also reduce the flux that is passing through the membrane. So the fouling is a very important, and we can say it is a matter of concern that the fouling of the membrane will not only reduce the life of the membrane, but it will also increase the cost of the treatment by using the membrane process. So that's why we always see that the fouling may be reduced to a great extent, so that the efficiency of the membrane process may go down. Similarly, when we talk of the cleaning of the membrane, so we can either clean it where it is, so it is called the cleaning in place, CIP. That is the process of the cleaning of the membrane when they are in position, when they are basically being used. So we can clean them at their position only. So that is called cleaning in place. That is, it may be done by passing through air or by backwashing the membrane, so that it may be cleaned, it may be washed at the place where it is housed, right? So otherwise we have to take out the membrane from the system, we have to disassemble the system, and then we have to stop our operation, and then we have to clean it by different processes. For example, we can go for the physical cleaning, where we use only water for cleaning the membrane surface, or we can also use the chemicals, so that we can clean, we can basically bring the flux back to its original position. So that is basically known as the out of the place cleaning. Similarly, it is because of the fouling mechanism, so it is very important that we go for the pre-treatment of the water or wastewater that is being subjected to the membrane. So here the processes which are applied to the raw water before the membrane filtration, so that they can reduce the contaminants that may cause fouling or damage to the membranes. So that process is known as the pre-treatment process. Similarly, after the membrane filtration happens, so after that, whatever the processes are applied so that we can enhance the quality further, so that is known as the post treatment, which is applied to the permeate or the filtrate that we are getting from the membrane filtration, so that we can meet the specific water quality standards. Similarly, the selectivity of the membrane is also a very important term. This means that the ability of the membrane, so that it can discriminate between the different substances. For example, it based upon the size of the constituents, it may be based upon the charge of the constituents which are present in the water, or it may be based upon the other properties like shape of the constituents that are present in the water. So based on that, the membrane may discriminate the different type of species, so that they can be removed from the system, and whatever the species we want in the water, so that may go into the filtrate or the permeate. Similarly, pore size also plays a very important role in the membrane, that which means that the size of the openings of pores which are present in the membrane, so that is called the pore size, and this allows the size of the particles that can pass through it when we are talking about the filtration mechanism. Similarly, the rejection means that is the percentage of a particular substance that is prevented from passing the membrane, so that is called the rejection. For example, let's say we are having a very high TDS in the water, so that TDS we do not want to come into the permeate or into the filtrate. So whatever the percentage of the TDS that goes along with the concentrate or the retentate, so that is called the rejection, or the percentage of the TDS that is going into the rejects or that is going into the concentrate, so that is called the rejection. So then we are having a very important term here, that is the osmosis. So the osmosis means that the movement of the solute molecules from an area of lower solute concentration to an area of higher solute concentration, if when we are separating these two solutions by a semi-permeable membrane. So we can see here that this is a reactor in which we are having two types of solutions. One is having a fresh water here and other is having a salt solution here. So the concentration of the solvent is higher on in the fresh water, whereas the concentration of solvent is lower in the salt solution. And similarly, the solute concentration in the fresh water is low, whereas the solute concentration in the salt water is high. So what happens that the water from the solvent from here, it starts moving from the higher concentration to the part which is having a lower concentration, so of the solvent, until the concentration of the solute in both the part, it becomes constant, it becomes same. So that is how the movement takes place, and this process is called a osmosis, and this happens when we are separating these two solutions by a semi-permeable membrane, which will allow a certain type of molecules to pass through it. For example, here the water molecules can pass through the membrane. So such type of process is called osmosis. So forward osmosis means that is when we are separating the two solutions by a means of a semi-permeable membrane, the water moves from the feed solution to the more concentrated raw solution. So this is called the forward osmosis. It is similar to the osmosis process in which the movement of the water is taking place in the direction in which the osmosis happens. Whereas the pressure retarded osmosis means that it harvests the energy that is generated from the osmotic pressure difference. For example, when we talk of the osmosis, so there may be a pressure difference because of this movement, so that may be generated here. So this is basically harnessed, and this is called pressure retarded osmosis. Whereas the reverse osmosis means that is we are having the reverse process happening here. So this means that when we are allowing the water from the higher concentration of solute towards a water which is having a lower concentration of the solute, so in that case we are going against the osmosis and we are going against the osmotic pressure. So this means that we have to apply a certain pressure so that we can achieve this movement from the higher concentration of the solute towards the lower concentration of the solute. So this means that this pressure must be greater than the osmotic pressure which is existing when we are not applying any pressure. Because the water is moving in the reverse direction, so this process is known as the reverse osmosis. So we can see sketch for the membrane process. So here we are having the feed water. So this feed water may be having a flow rate of QF here, and CF is the concentration of the feed water concentration. So we can have the concentration of any contaminant or the target species that we want to remove. So this is basically will be denoted by CF, whereas PF is the feed water pressure, the pressure at which we are injecting our feed water into the membrane module. Similarly, the water that is coming out from this membrane, so this is called permeate, and the flow rate of the permeate is known as the permeate flow rate, whereas the concentration of the species that we are targeting, so the concentration in the permeate is called permeate concentration, and the pressure at which the permeate is coming out, so this is known as the permeate pressure. Similarly, the reject that is going out of the membrane, that is being rejected by the membrane, so this is called the concentrate flow rate. So this concentrate flow rate may have a certain concentration of a targeted species. Like for example, when we talk of TDS, so it may be having very high concentration of the TDS into it. So this is called the concentrate concentration. And similarly, the pressure at which the concentrate comes out is called the concentrate pressure. And the Kw and Ki you can see here, so they are basically the water and solute mass transfer coefficient through the membrane. So we can classify the membrane separation process based upon the pore size, based upon the driving force, based upon the application that we are doing, based upon the configuration of the membrane, based upon the specific processes. So based on the pore size, we can divide the membrane processes into microfiltration, ultrafiltration, nanofiltration, and reverse osmosis. So as the term suggests, the pore size are different for different type of membrane filtrations. For example, when we talk of the microfiltration, so it is having a pore size of nearly zero point 0.1 to 10 micrometers, and such type of membranes can be used for removal of the suspended solids because the size is larger. It can also be used for the removal of the bacteria when the size is less than 1 micrometers, and similarly it can also be used for the removal of the large colloidal particles. So when we talk of the ultrafiltration, so in that case we are having the pore size of nearly 0.01 to zero point 0.1 micrometers, and it can be also used for removal of the colloids. It can be used for removal of bacteria, viruses, proteins, and macromolecules. In nanofiltration, the pore size is nearly 10 to the minus 3 to 10 to the minus 2 micrometers, and it is used for the selective removals of certain multivalent ions because of its size, and the organic matter, that is the dissolved organic matter, as well as the color which may be imparted because of the dissolved constituents in the water. And lastly, we'll talk about the reverse osmosis, where the pore size may be around 10 to the minus 4 micrometers. So this may be used for the removal of the dissolved solids, dissolved ions. Similarly, it may be used for the desalination of the waters. It may be used for the removal of the organic compounds as we are targeting the wastewater and other impurities which are present in the water or wastewater. So we can see here that the raw water, basically it may go through the different type of filters. For example, when we talk of the microfiltration, so it is having a pore size of 10 to zero point 0.1 microns, and it can remove a number of impurities which are there, right? For example, suspended particles are there. We are having the oil emulsifiers, bacterial cells, colloidal particles. So they all basically can be removed from the microfilters, whereas the other things, for example, the viruses, the macromolecules, the proteins, so they may leach, so they may go into the filtrate, right? So then we have to use ultrafiltration, where the size may be around 0.1 to 0.01 microns, and it may remove further the materials, and it may lead only to the leakage of the monovalent ions or divalent ions or submolecular organic groups. So they may go into the filtrate. For further filtration, we may apply the nanofiltration, where nanofiltration is having a size of nearly 0.01 to zero point 0.001 microns, and it may lead to the release of the monovalent ions here. And when we go for the reverse osmosis process, which is having around 10 to the minus 2 to 10 to the minus 4 microns of the pore size, so this may lead to the demineralization. It may lead to the removal of the ions which are present in the water, and we can get a desalinated water in that case. And as we see that as the type of the filters are changing, so we can also see that the pressure that we have to apply is also increasing. So basically when we talk of the microfiltration, it is 0.2 to 5 bars. When we talk of the ultrafiltration, it is around 1 to 10 bars. When we talk of the nanofiltration, it is 5 to 10 bars. Whereas for the reverse osmosis process, a very high pressure may be needed. It may be around 10 to 150 bars. Similarly, the driving force can also classify the membrane processes, where we can have the pressure driven processes, where we talk about the RO, nanofiltration, ultrafiltration. So we have to apply a very high pressure so that we can overcome the osmotic pressure, and the water can be forced through the membranes as the pore size is very small. Similarly, we have the concentration driven process. For example, when we have talked about the forward osmosis, so in that case, the osmotic pressure difference between the feed and the draw solutions, so that basically provides the driving force. Similarly, we can also have the electrical driven processes which are called electrodialysis. So here the ions basically they move under the electrical field which is applied, and we are having a certain ion selective exchange membranes. So they can allow certain types of ions to go through them, and that's how we can separate out the different type of ions and we can get the water of the desired quality. So based on the application, we can have the water or wastewater treatment that we are talking about. So we can use microfiltration here, we can use ultrafiltration, nanofiltration, the RO or the membrane bioreactor. So here it can be used for the municipal water treatment, it can be used for the industrial wastewater treatment, it can be used for the municipal wastewater treatment also, it can also be used for the desalination purposes. Okay. So here, as we have already talked about the membrane bioreactor, so the membrane bioreactor can be used for the treatment of the wastewater. So, or we can talk about the anaerobic membrane bioreactor. So it can enhance the sludge retention time to a very great extent. So as we know that the hydraulic retention time and sludge retention time or the sludge age, so they are different in the bioreactors. So this means that when we are applying a membrane process to it, it may hold the sludge for a longer time so that the sludge age or the sludge retention time it increases many folds, and it has been found that the sludge retention time may go up to more than 100 days in such type of reactors. The membrane process can also be used for biomedical applications where ultrafiltration and membrane filtration may be used for the blood filtration, for protein separation, as well as for the pharmaceutical processing. Similarly, the membrane processes can be used for the food and beverage industries where the ultrafiltration and nanofiltration can be used for the clarification, for the concentration, for fractionations of various liquids. So there the ultrafiltration and nanofiltration can be applied. Similarly, for chemical and petrochemical industries, the separation and concentration of chemicals, purification of processed water, we can use RO as well as the nanofiltration techniques. For the gas separation also we can use, for example, when we want to separate out the gases like hydrogen, carbon dioxide, methane, we want to produce gases of very high quality or purity. So in that case, we can also use the gas permeation process. So based on the configuration, we can divide the membrane process into the spiral wound modules, we can divide it into tubular modules, we can have the plate and frame modules. So the spiral wound modules means that is we are having the flat sheets, so they are wounded around a permeate tube in a spiral manner. So that is basically called the spiral wound modules, right? So the application may be in the reverse osmosis process or nanofiltration or the ultrafiltration. Similarly, when we talk of the tubular module, so we can have two types of arrangement here. That is, one is called the hollow fiber and other is also known as the tubular membrane. So these type of membranes, so they may be employed for the processes like microfiltration and the ultrafiltration. Similarly, we can have plate and frame modules where the membranes are placed between the plates and the frames, and they may be used for laboratory scale filtration, industrial processes. They may also be used for the wastewater treatment also. So based on the specific processes, for example, when we have just now talked about the membrane bioreactors, so this biological treatment with membrane filtration will reduce the cost of the secondary settling tank, and it may also enhance the efficiency of the membrane bioreactors in the sense that it will enhance the sludge retention time of the anaerobic membrane bioreactors to a great extent. It will reduce the footprint, it will also reduce the cost of the treatment processes. So it may be used for municipal as well as the industrial wastewater treatments. Similarly, we can have the electrodialysis process where the ion exchange membranes can be used, and these type of processes may be used for the desalination, for the treatment of water which is laden with very high concentration of salts, and similarly it can also be used for the electrodialysis reversals. Similarly, we can also use pervaporation where the vaporization of a liquid through the membrane for the separation of azeotropic mixtures or the dehydration of organic solvents can be utilized. So the removal mechanism in the membrane filtration, it relies on the selective permeability of the membrane so that they can separate the particles and solutes from the solvent based on the size, shape, charge as well as the other properties. So here we can see that the mechanism for microfiltration, ultrafiltration, nanofiltration or reverse osmosis that we have just now discussed, so it basically may differ for different type of filtration processes. For example, when we talk about the microfiltration, so the size is nearly zero point 0.1 to 10 micrometers. So here we see that the mechanical filtration is the process that is basically used for the removal mechanism, right? So the larger particles, for example, the suspended particles, the bacteria or the larger fluoridated particles, so they are physically blocked by the membrane. So the particles which are less than the pore size of the microfilter, so that can pass through the membrane. So it is mechanical filtration takes place here, and similarly the sieving effects also basically takes place here. That is, the smaller size particles, they pass through the membrane, whereas the larger particle size, so they are retained on the membrane surface. So for the ultrafiltration also we are having the size of around 0.001 to zero point 0.1 micrometers. So here the ultrafiltration basically works on the mechanism of size exclusion. So where it allows the smaller particles like colloids, bacteria and viruses, proteins and macromolecules. So they are allowed to pass, whereas the larger particles, they basically are hindered by the surface of the this thing. And similarly, the larger particles, they are hindered by the molecular structure of the membrane also. So that is called the steric hindrance. So we are having the nanofiltration where we see that the pore size may be around 0.001 to 0.01 micrometers, and here also the size exclusion plays a very important role. It may be used for the removal of multivalent ions, similarly organic matters and colors basically can be removed, and it can also be based upon the charge based rejection methods. That is, the membrane may have a charge that repels the ions of the similar charge. So we can have two type of mechanism here, the size exclusion as well as the charge based rejection. Then reverse osmosis, where we are having a very small size of the pores, so they also prevents the passage of the ions, molecules and particles which are larger than the size of the membrane pores. And similarly, so the size exclusion also plays a very important role. Similarly, the drag molecules, that is water molecules, are forced through the membrane by the applied pressure. It leaves behind the dissolved ions and other impurities behind. So the solvent drags also plays a very important role in the removal mechanism by RO process. So we can see here that the first part here is the removal by the size exclusion. So you can see here that the bigger particles, they remain on the top of the membrane, whereas the smaller size particles, so they are passing through the membrane. So this is called as the size exclusion process. Similarly, the second part may be the adsorption, that is some type of molecules or some type of constituents in the water. So they may be hydrophobic in nature, so they may remain adsorbed onto the surface of the membrane, and whereas the particles which are hydrophilic in nature, so they may pass through the membrane, right? So this is known as the adsorption process. Similarly, we can see that there can be certain charges on the membrane. For example, you can see here that the membrane is having the positive charge here, whereas the particles which are having the positive charge, so they may be repelled and they may not pass through the membrane, whereas the particles which are neutral or particles which are negative, so they may be allowed to pass through the membrane. So this is called a electrostatic repulsion mechanism. Similarly, we can also have the adsorption on the fouling layer when we are using the membrane for wastewater treatment processes. So in that case, a layer of the fouling basically may be deposited on the surface of the membrane, and this may lead to the adsorption of the molecules which are similar in nature, and we see that such adsorption may not allow the certain particles which are basically cling to the surface of the fouling layer, and whereas the rest of the molecules, they may be allowed to pass. So we stop here in this lecture, and we will be talking about the various type of membranes that we use and how basically we can design the membrane system in our coming lecture. Thank you.